Welcome to Signifiers and Brand Communication. I'm your professor, Dr. English Dowdell. Now, in the last module, we explored how signifiers help users understand what actions are possible in an interface. Now, today, we kind of expand that idea beyond buttons and screens and into branding. So, let me ask you something. When you see a logo, instantly without thinking, what happens? You feel something, right? You assume something, you trust, or you don't. Now, that reaction is not accidental. Logos are signifiers. They communicate meaning long before we read a tagline or mission statement or even the product description. Today, we're going to explore how organizations use signifiers to communicate identity, value, trust, and purpose, and how you, as an HCI analyst, can evaluate that communication. In digital interfaces, signifiers tell us click here, type here, delete this. But in branding, signifiers tell us we are innovative, we are trustworthy, we are friendly, we are premium, we are secure. A logo is not just decoration, it's a condensed visual message. It represents organizational identity, reputation, values, and promise. Now, just like interface elements, logos can be categorized also as icons, symbols, indexes, or a combination of these. So let's briefly revisit these categories now through a branding lens. So a logo can function as an icon when it visually represents or resembles what the organization does. So for example, a camera for a photography brand, a leaf for like an eco-friendly company, or a house shape for like a real estate firm. Icons communicate, remember, through resemblance. They're often immediately understandable, but they can also be literal, predictable, or generic if not thoughtfully designed. Now, most logos function primarily as symbols. They do not resemble the product or the service directly. Instead, they rely on like color psychology, typography, shape association, or even like cultural meaning. So, for example, like a circle might communicate unity. Okay, blue might communicate trust, or a bold sans serif typography might communicate modernness. Symbols require interpretation. They're powerful because they create identity beyond the literal representation. Now, less commonly discussed but important, logos can also function as indexes. Remember, an index connects meaning through association or evidence. So, for example, a shield shape implies protection. Okay, a check mark implies approval or correctness. And then, like a swoosh, suggests motion or speed. Indexes don't resemble the product directly, but they hint at qualities or outcomes. Now, let's talk about how signifiers influence trust. Now, this is where HCI and branding intersect. Users form trust judgments in milliseconds. Before reading reviews or policies or descriptions, they react to visual cues. Signifiers influence perceived professionalism, credibility, being stable, innovation, being accessible. A poorly designed logo can subconsciously communicate being an amateur, instability, lack of clarity, or even mistrust, even if the organization itself is strong. Visual communication shapes perception, and perception shapes behavior, and then behavior shapes engagement. Now, when you're analyzing a logo for your assignment for this week, I want you to go beyond I like it or I don't like it. Instead, ask, what message is the organization likely trying to communicate? How do the visual elements support that message? Is the logo primarily an icon, a symbol, an index, or maybe it's a layer of more than one? Would a first time viewer interpret it as intended? Does it draw attention effectively in digital spaces? Or does it scale well for online environments? Now, in today's digital world, logos must function as profile images, as app icons, as social media thumbnails, on websites, on mobile devices. So, effectiveness now includes digital adaptability. And think about logos in small formats, like on a phone screen or in a browser tab or as a social media avatar. Is the signifier, is it too detailed or too abstract or unclear in small sizes? If so, then what happens is its effectiveness decreases. Strong brand signifiers are recognized at a glance. They maintain clarity even at a small scale, and they communicate identity quickly. Remember, online users, they scroll fast, okay? So attention is limited and clarity is critical. Now, for this module's assignment, you're going to select a brand logo. You're going to analyze what it communicates. You're going to categorize it as either an icon, a symbol, an index, or a combination. And then you're going to evaluate its effectiveness in digital context. And then I want you to engage with a peer by adding insight beyond their initial analysis. Now, when responding to a classmate, don't repeat what they already said, okay? Instead, identify like additional visual elements. Consider alternative interpretations. Discuss audience perception. Evaluate like digital visibility. And then consider like cultural implications. Your goal is basically to deepen the analysis. Now remember, you're not judging artistic preference, okay? You're analyzing communication effectiveness. Brand signifiers shape our expectations, our trust, our emotional response, our perceived credibility. Logos are often the first interaction a user has with an organization, and that makes them powerful from an HCI perspective. All right, now let me leave you with this. If an interface fails, users feel confused. But if branding fails, users feel uncertain, and uncertainty reduces trust. Now, as you analyze logos in this module, consider not only what they show, but what they imply. In digital environments, visual communication is often the first conversation between an organization and its audience, and signifiers are how that conversation begins.